Welcome to the Stoic Storyteller, your sanctuary for raw, unfiltered stories about the darker side of human nature. Here, we dive deep into the reality of life, the toxic relationships, the bitter betrayals, and the quiet, calculating art of absolute justice.
There are people in this world who will take everything you have and call it love. They'll take your first paycheck, then your savings, then the years you should have spent building something for yourself. They'll take it with a look, with a sigh, with the particular silence of people who have decided your sacrifice is simply the natural order of things. And when you finally have nothing left to give, when the account runs dry and the car is sold and the overtime stops, they won't grieve the loss of you. They'll grieve the loss of the money. My name is Daniel Carter. For 12 years, I was the reason my family kept the lights on. I paid the mortgage on a house my name wasn't on. I covered my father's debts without being asked. I funded my sister's wedding, her honeymoon, the furniture in her new apartment. I missed birthdays and vacations, and the kind of quiet weekends a man in his 30s is supposed to have. Because there was always something else. Always another call, another number, another version of the same conversation that ended with me saying yes. The month I lost my job, my mother changed the locks. Not immediately. She waited until she was certain the money wasn't coming. And then she changed the locks, and she didn't call to tell me. And I found out standing on the front step of a house I had paid for in the middle of a Chicago February with snow coming down and nowhere to go. This is what I did after that. The first thing you need to understand about my family is that the math never worked. Not the financial math, though that didn't work either, but the emotional math. The math of who gave what and who received what and what any of it was supposed to mean. I understood this somewhere in my early 20s, in the way you understand things you're not ready to act on yet. Clearly, quietly, filed away under deal with this later. Later kept not arriving. My father, Richard Carter, was 58 years old and had been between jobs for most of my adult life in the particular way of men who prefer the concept of work to its execution. He wasn't cruel. That was the complicated part. He was charming, actually, the kind of man who could walk into any room and make people feel immediately at ease, who remembered names and told good stories and laughed at exactly the right moments. He was just constitutionally unsuited to the sustained, unglamorous effort of maintaining a life. Bills bored him. Responsibility made him anxious. Money arrived and disappeared with an ease that suggested he experienced it as a weather condition rather than something you managed. My mother, Linda, was different. Linda was organized and sharp and capable of tremendous effort when the effort was directed at the right target. The right target, in her understanding of the world, was Sophie. Sophie was 28. Sophie was the youngest, the only daughter, the one my mother had looked at from birth with the particular expression of a woman who sees in a child everything she wanted for herself. Sophie had been given things, not lavish things, not always, but given them in the way that matters most, which is without being asked. Her college was paid for before the question came up. Her car appeared on her 21st birthday, when she got engaged to a man named Marcus who worked in real estate, and had the easy confidence of someone who had never been financially uncertain. My mother began planning a wedding with a budget that had no relationship to actual available funds. I was the available fund. I want to be precise about this because I've spent a lot of time reconstructing it and I think precision matters. I wasn't pressured into a single large sacrifice. It wasn't one conversation, one dramatic ask, one moment I could point to and say, there, that's where it started. It was accumulated. Small amounts at first, 100 here, a few hundred there, covering a shortfall, bridging a gap, solving the immediate problem because the immediate problem was always urgent, and the larger pattern was always easier to not look at directly. By the time I was 30, I was paying the mortgage on my parents' house, $4,100 a month, on a property in the Naperville suburbs that my father had bought during a period of brief financial optimism and could no longer service. My father's credit card minimum payments, which cycled back to their maximums within 3 months of being paid down. My sister's car insurance, her gym membership, the occasional loan that was never repaid, and both of us knew it. I was making good money. That was the thing that made it sustainable for as long as it was. I was a senior analyst at Meridian Financial Partners, pulling down enough that the amounts individually weren't catastrophic. It was the aggregate that was the problem. The aggregate and the fact that it never stopped growing. I had a one-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park that I was rarely in. I drove a 4-year-old Accord that I paid for outright because I couldn't afford a car payment on top of everything else. I had a savings account with a balance that a man my age should have been embarrassed by, and I was embarrassed by it. And I kept that embarrassment private because there was no version of explaining it to anyone that didn't require explaining the rest. On a Tuesday evening in October, I drove out to Naperville after work. My mother had called that afternoon. Not urgently, her voice had the particular modulation of a woman who has learned to deliver difficult information in a tone that makes it sound like logistics. "Your father needs to talk to you about something. Can you come for dinner?" The house was warm when I got there. That was always the thing. The house was always warm, always smelled like something cooking, always had the television on in the den, always held the sensory memory of what home is supposed to feel like. I think that was part of why it worked as long as it did. Walking into that house made it harder to hold onto the cold version of what I knew. My father was in the kitchen. My mother was at the stove. Sophie was not there. She had her own apartment by then in Lincoln Park, which I was partially paying for through the loan arrangement. "Sit down," my father said. He was smiling, that good room smile he had. "How was the drive?" "Fine, traffic on the 90. Always traffic on the 90. My mother put food on the table. We ate. We talked about things that didn't matter. A neighbor's renovation, a show my mother was watching, the weather coming in off the lake. My father refilled my water glass without being asked, which he always did when he wanted something. After dinner, he said, "So, there's a small situation." Small situation. It was $42,000. He'd borrowed it over the previous 18 months, not from a bank, not from an institution with paperwork and interest rates and a process. From 3 separate individuals, 2 former colleagues and a man named Jerry who had done some contracting work on the house years ago. The money had gone toward what my father described as investment opportunities, in the same tone you describe a sensible home repair. The opportunities had not returned what was invested. The 3 individuals were now asking for their money back. "I can handle most of it," my father said. He'd set down his fork. The good room smile was still there, but different now, calibrated for a specific kind of ask, which was the ask that presents itself as sharing a problem rather than imposing one. "The Jerry situation is the one he's getting impatient. He's talking about getting a lawyer involved." "How much is Jerry?" $18,000. I looked at my father. He looked back at me. My mother was looking at the table. "I need a few months," I said. "I can't. Jerry's not going to wait a few months, Danny." Danny, he called me Danny when he needed something. Had since I was a kid. I noticed it the way you notice a tell. Without pleasure, without anger, just as information. "I don't have 18,000 liquid right now. The savings account. That's emergency money, Dad." My mother looked up then. Not with manipulation, exactly, or not only manipulation. With genuine anxiety, the anxiety of a woman who has spent 30 years watching financial problems arrive and has developed a specific kind of panic response to them. "We just need to get through this one thing," she said. "Once the Jerry situation is handled, your father is going to." "I'll handle it," I said. I said it before she finished the sentence. That was the habit. That was 12 years of the habit. Deep enough by now that the yes arrived before I'd consciously decided on it. Before I'd done the math. Before I'd asked myself the question I should have been asking. I drove home on the 90 with the radio off and $42,000 rearranging itself in my head. In the apartment, I poured a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter and looked at nothing in particular for a while. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank account and looked at the number in the savings column and thought about what it represented. 23 months of putting away a set amount every month, no matter what. 23 months of the specific discipline of a man who knew that the money going out was more than it should be and compensated by being precise about the money staying in. I transferred $18,000 to my father's account. Then I sat at the counter a while longer, not because there was anything to think about. The thinking was done, but because sometimes after you do a thing you already knew you were going to do, you need a moment before the next thing begins. I found the loan documents 3 weeks later. I wasn't looking for them. I was helping my parents sort through a filing cabinet they'd asked me to organize. Another favor, one afternoon weekend trip to Naperville. And I found a folder near the back that was labeled, in my father's handwriting, business correspondence. Inside were 3 loan agreements. I recognized the format because I worked in finance. The forms were standard personal loan contracts, 2 pages each, with the amounts and repayment terms and the signature lines at the bottom. My signature was on all 3. I stood in my parents' study holding those documents, and read them twice to make sure I was understanding what I was reading. My signature, my actual signature, the one I'd been making since I was 15, the slightly angular D and the compressed asterisk article, on agreements I had never seen, for loans I had agreed to cover but had not agreed to cosign, which was a different thing, a legally different thing. My father had forged my name, not the money, not the repayment itself, which I'd done voluntarily. He'd gone further. He'd put my name on the original documents without telling me, without asking, had made me legally responsible for the debt in a way that extended beyond my willingness to help and into the territory of my actual credit, my actual legal standing. I put the documents back in the folder. I put the folder back in the filing cabinet in the right place, behind the other folders. I finished organizing the cabinet. I drove home. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Sophie's engagement party was in November. The wedding was set for the following June. I knew what the wedding was going to cost before anyone told me because I knew my mother. I knew the way her voice went when she was building towards something. A particular quality of enthusiasm that moved in one direction, toward the larger version of whatever was being planned, and had no natural ceiling. She called me the week after the engagement party and talked for 20 minutes about venues, which translated in the language I'd developed for these conversations, to, I need to know how much I can spend. How much is the venue budget? I asked. A pause. We were thinking the Palmer House Ballroom. The Palmer House Ballroom was $12,000 for the venue alone, not including catering or flowers or the other 17 categories of wedding expense. Mom, it's her wedding, Daniel. I know it's her wedding. She's only going to do this once. I thought about a number of things I could say. I did not say them. Tell me the total number. The total number by the time we finished the conversation was $68,000. Not all of it mine to cover. Marcus's family would contribute something, though the something was vague and turned out, eventually, to be several thousand in a direction that didn't move the needle. The majority in the architecture of my mother's planning was assumed to come from me, not asked. Assumed. Which was how it always worked. The ask was implicit, structural, built into the conversation before the conversation happened. I said I'd think about it. I went to Sophie's apartment 2 days later. Her place was bright and well decorated. She had a good eye, always had, and the apartment reflected it. There were flowers on the kitchen counter. A print on the wall I recognized from an artist she'd mentioned wanting. The couch was new. Sophie made coffee. We sat at her kitchen table, and she showed me things on her phone, photos of venues, florists, a dress she was considering. She was happy in the unguarded way she could be when she wasn't performing for an audience. And I sat across from her and drank my coffee and thought about the loan documents in my parents' filing cabinet, and about the savings account balance, and about the math. The Palmer House is a lot, I said. She looked up from her phone. Something shifted in her face, not anger yet, more like the preparation for it. It's my wedding. I know. You've been saying you'd help with this for months. I said I'd help. I didn't put a number on it. Mom said, Mom doesn't know what I have available. You make good money, Daniel? She said it with the particular certainty of someone who has spent years not needing to know what things actually cost. You always figure it out. I've been figuring it out for 12 years. That's the, oh, here we go. She set her phone face down on the table. The unguarded happiness was gone now, replaced by the version of Sophie that came out when she felt the conversation moving in a direction she didn't like. One conversation about money and you have to make it about your sacrifices. I'm not. You do this every time. Every time anyone needs anything, it becomes this whole production about how much you've given. Like we're supposed to be grateful every single day. I looked at her. You're not supposed to be grateful every day, I said. I'd settle for occasionally. She looked back at me with the expression of someone who has genuinely never had to consider the possibility that what they receive might have a cost. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was something more complete than cruelty, a total absence of the framework in which the question could even be asked. I'll figure out the venue, I said. I drove home. I figured out the venue. The wedding was in June, at the Palmer House Ballroom, with 214 guests and flowers that had been arranged by a woman my mother found in a magazine and catering that ran to a buffet of a scope I associated with corporate events rather than personal ones. It was beautiful. Everyone said it was beautiful. My mother cried in the way she cried at things that had turned out as she'd hoped, which was with a particular satisfaction underneath the emotion. I sat at a table near the back. I'd been placed at table 11, which held two of Marcus's cousins, a college friend of Sophie's I'd met once, and two couples whose connection to the event I never fully established. The family table, the head table adjacent, held my parents, Sophie and Marcus's parents. I was not at the family table. I noticed it the way I noticed the loan documents, without drama, just as information. Filed away. After dinner, after the speeches, after the dancing had started and the older guests had moved toward the bar, I stepped outside. The Palmer house had a side exit to a service corridor that opened onto Monroe Street. I stood in the June evening and loosened my tie and thought about nothing in particular. Through the door behind me, I could hear the band. I went back inside to find my coat and discovered, instead, a conversation. My mother and Sophie were standing near the entrance to the coat room, in a space between a coat rack and the wall that probably felt private. I heard my name before I turned the corner. I stopped. "Always makes it such a big deal," Sophie was saying. Her voice had the lightness of someone a few glasses of champagne past their usual guard. "I've been listening to it for years. Danny's money, Danny's sacrifice, Danny this and Danny that." "SHH," my mother's voice low. "I'm serious, Mom. He acts like we should build a statue. He's 33 years old and all he does is work and give us money and then want credit for it. Like," she paused, laughed slightly. "Marcus's cousin asked me today why my brother wasn't at the family table and I didn't know what to say. I said he's shy." "He's not shy. I know he's not shy. He's just—" Another pause. "He's like an ATM that also has feelings, an ATM that needs you to say thank you every time you use it." My mother made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was brief, quickly suppressed, but it was there. I stood behind the coat rack in the Palmer house on my sister's wedding night and heard my mother suppress a laugh at being compared to an ATM user, and I felt something that I did not have a clean name for. Not rage, not yet, not that night. Something quieter. A door closing somewhere inside, not slamming, just clicking shut. I got my coat. I left before the cake was cut. The layoffs were announced on a Wednesday. Meridian Financial Partners was restructuring. That was the word, restructuring, which is the corporate term for the specific activity of reducing a human being's income and future prospects while maintaining the grammatical distance of the passive voice. 17% of staff. I was in the 17%. My manager told me in a glass-walled conference room at 10:15 in the morning with an HR representative present, and I sat across the table from him and looked at the severance package documents they'd prepared and thought, with the part of my brain that processes things practically before it processes them emotionally. I have 4 months of runway. 4 months was not enough. The mortgage, the credit card minimums, Sophie's car insurance, which I hadn't gotten around to canceling, my own rent, my own expenses, the ordinary costs of a life that I had been subsidizing for 12 years while underinvesting in my own stability. 4 months of runway. I drove to Naperville that evening. I hadn't planned to. I had planned, in fact, to take a few days before telling my parents, to have something resembling a plan before the conversation happened. But 4 months had a way of feeling urgent, and the loan documents in the filing cabinet had a way of making me want to have a direct conversation about what we were doing here before the situation became critical. My mother was alone. My father was out at a friend's, she said, which probably meant the friend had a television and a reason to avoid home. I sat at the kitchen table. She made tea. She moved around the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has made tea for difficult conversations many times. I told her I'd been laid off. She set a mug in front of me. She sat down across the table. Her expression went through several things: concern, rapid calculation, the processing of what this meant. And then it settled. And when it settled on a question. "What about this month's payment?" she said. "Not, are you okay? Not, what do you need? The mortgage payment." "I'll cover it," I said. "I have severance. And next month, I'm working on it." She wrapped her hands around her mug. She looked at me with the expression I knew well, not unkind, not deliberately cold, but the expression of a woman for whom my financial utility had become so fundamental to her understanding of me that any disruption to it registered first as a practical problem, and second, maybe, as something else. "Your father and I have been doing the numbers," she said, "with your sister's situation. She and Marcus have some debt from the wedding. They needed to borrow against the honeymoon budget. Mom, and your father's situation with the Hendersons hasn't been fully." "Mom," I said it flatly enough that she stopped. "I lost my job today." She looked at me. "I know," she said. "I heard you." We sat there for a moment. "I just need to know we can count on you," she said. "That's all. I'm not asking for anything extra. I just need to know the basics are covered. The basics. The mortgage on a house that wasn't mine. The minimum payments on a debt I hadn't agreed to. The basics of a financial structure I had built over 12 years that existed entirely for other people and had produced, for me, a 4-month runway and a savings account that was already committed. I'm going to need to focus on finding work," I said. "Of course," quick, accommodating. "Of course you are, we're not asking you to," she stopped. A shift. "Have you thought about talking to someone about a bridge loan, just something to cover the gap while I look for work, just to keep things stable?" I looked at her. She looked back at me with the particular expression of a woman who has decided that her anxiety constitutes a form of love and cannot be asked to distinguish between them. "I'll handle it," I said. The drive home was 40 minutes. I handled it, the mortgage, the minimums, 1 more month of the basics. From the severance while I applied for jobs and went to interviews and reconstructed, in the space of October evenings in my Wicker Park apartment, what the next version of my professional life might look like. The interview at Henderson Capital went well. The second interview went well. The third interview ended with the hiring manager saying they were moving in a different direction, in a tone that suggested the direction did not include me. I drove home from Henderson Capital in November rain on a Tuesday afternoon and stopped at my parents' house because my mother had called that morning and asked me to, the specific kind of ask that doesn't specify what it's about, which had trained me over the years to interpret as something I needed to handle in person. My mother was in the kitchen. She had the expression she wore when she'd made a decision she knew I wasn't going to like, and had prepared for my not liking it by deciding in advance that my reaction was unreasonable. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay. Sophie and Marcus are having some difficulties with the lease on their apartment." She paused. Your car is paid off, isn't it?" I looked at her. "You could get a newer car later," she said. "Once you're working again, the resale value on the Accord is." "You want me to sell my car?" "I want you to consider." "That's my car, Mom. That's how I get to interviews." "Marcus could drive you." "Marcus lives in Lincoln Park." "Daniel," she said it with a particular quality, the quality that meant we were done negotiating the practical details and were now in the territory of emotional pressure, which was where she was most fluent. "Your sister is struggling. She's family. You've always found a way." "I have found a way." My voice came out flat, which happened when I was controlling something. "For 12 years I have found a way. I am currently unemployed. I have 4 months of reserves left, and you are asking me to sell my car." She looked at me with the eyes of a woman who had decided that my difficulty with this request was a character flaw. "I just thought," she said quietly, "that family takes care of family." I stood in her kitchen for a moment. "I need to think about it," I said. I went home. I did not sell the car, but I drove home that night knowing, not with drama, not with a decision I'd consciously made, but with the specific understanding of a man who has seen the same road long enough to know where it ends, that something was running out. Not the money, not only the money, something more fundamental. The thing that had made the yes arrive before the question was finished. The thing that had sent me to Naperville instead of taking care of myself. The thing that had been reading those documents in the filing cabinet as information rather than emergency. I drove home in November rain, and I parked the car, and I sat in it for a while with the engine off. I thought I need to stop. I thought I don't know how. 4 weeks later, I went back to my parents' house on a Thursday afternoon after a second interview with a company in the loop that had gone. I thought, reasonably well. I put my key in the front door. The key didn't turn. I tried it again. Removed it, reinserted the full, careful turn. The lock cylinder moved, but the mechanism didn't engage, the particular non-response of a lock that has been changed. I stood on the front step. The porch light was on. Inside, through the narrow window beside the door, I could see the hallway light. Someone was home. I knocked. My mother came to the door. She opened it, not wide, the way you open a door for someone arriving, but part way, the way you open it for someone you're deciding whether to let in. She was wearing her house clothes. Her expression was the expression of a woman who had rehearsed this. "The key doesn't work," I said. "I had the locks rekeyed." She said it the way you'd say I had the gutters cleaned. Factual, domestic, addressed. "Why?" She looked at me. "We thought it was better." "Better?" I stood on the step I'd paid for, outside the door I'd paid for, looking at my mother through a gap she'd chosen to create. Better for who? For everyone, given the situation. The situation. "Daniel," Something in her voice shifted, a practiced pivot from factual to pained, the emotional gear change I'd watched her make 1,000 times. You're going through things and I'm going through an unemployment period, I said. That's what's happening. We just need some space, some stability until things. You changed the locks, I said, on a house I pay the mortgage on. She looked at me with the eyes of a woman who has explained something and is frustrated that the other person isn't accepting the explanation. The account, she said, last month's payment, is current, but going forward, is current, I said. I've missed nothing. We stood there on either side of the door she'd opened part way. February cold coming in from behind me. The hallway light warm and ordinary beyond her. I can't give you a key right now, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at her the way you look at something when you're trying to fix it exactly as it is in your memory. Not because you want to remember it fondly, but because you want to make sure you never misremember it as something it wasn't. Okay, I said. I walked back to the car. I sat in it until the porch light went off. Then I drove, not home, not anywhere specific, just through the suburb streets and then onto the highway where the motion felt like something, where the city lights came up in the distance in the February dark, and the snow came down in the headlights, and I drove, and I didn't think about where I was going because thinking about where I was going required having somewhere to go. I slept in the car that night. I parked in a lot near a 24-hour diner on the west side of the city, and I reclined the seat as far as it would go, and I pulled my coat over myself, and I lay there in the dark with the heater running and listened to the snow tick against the windows. I was 35 years old. I had been paying for a family that had just locked me out of the house. I lay there in the car and the snow came down, and somewhere around 2 in the morning I stopped feeling things in the way I'd been feeling them. Not numb exactly, but different, quieter. The way a room goes quiet after a loud sound finally stops. I thought this is the last time. I thought I'm going to build something. I thought, and I'm going to do it alone. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Kedzie Avenue that had probably been decent in 1987 and had spent the intervening decades in a state of managed decline. $640 a month, a bedroom barely large enough for the bed, a kitchen that shared its square footage with the living area, a bathroom where the hot water took 4 minutes to arrive and sometimes didn't. I moved in on a Saturday in February with 2 bags of clothes, a box of books I'd kept in storage, and a folding table I bought at a Goodwill on Milwaukee Avenue for $11. The folding table became my desk. I found work through a temp agency, data entry and financial analysis for a logistics company in Bridgeport that needed someone who understood spreadsheets and didn't require benefits or a long-term commitment. The pay was $31 an hour. After 12 years in corporate finance, it felt like a different country. But a different country had the advantage of being located entirely outside the one I'd been living in, which at that particular moment felt like its primary virtue. I worked from 7 to 4. I came home. I made food on a 2-burner stove and ate it at the folding table and looked at the wall, and then I opened my laptop and I worked on the thing I was building in my head. The thing in my head was not fully formed yet. It was more like a direction, a way of understanding my own capabilities that I had spent 12 years redirecting toward other people's problems, and was now, for the first time in my adult life, aiming at myself. I understood financial systems, not academically, in the specific, practical way of someone who had spent a decade inside them, who had watched how money moved and where it got stuck, and what the friction points were that cost people time and resources they couldn't afford to lose. I had spent those years solving those problems for a firm that charged institutional clients significant fees to do it. I had never been particularly interested in who benefited. I started being interested. The nights were quiet on Kedzie Avenue in February. The building had a particular silence after 9 p.m. The family downstairs, the older woman across the hall, everyone sealed into their separate boxes of light. I sat at my folding table and I thought and I wrote things down and I thought more. And outside the window the city went on in its indifferent way, and it was the first time in years I could feel my own thoughts without someone else's urgency crowding them out. I thought about a lot of things in those weeks. I thought about the loan documents in my parents' filing cabinet, about the way my father's voice went when he called me Danny, about the coat check at the Palmer house and my sister's laugh, and the particular quality of my mother's suppressed smile. I thought about these things the way you inventory a wound. Not to feel them again, but to understand their actual dimensions, to know what you were actually dealing with. Here was what I was dealing with. My mother had never, not once in 35 years, asked me how I was doing and waited for the real answer. She'd asked in the way you ask people in passing, the courtesy question, the social formality, but the conversation always moved within sentences to what was needed, what the current problem was, what I could do about it. My father had forged my name on legal documents, had done it without telling me, without asking, without apparently considering it a significant action, had done it the way you borrow someone's pen, a momentary convenience, returned to its place, not worth mentioning. My sister had called me an ATM, had laughed about it, had repeated the joke to the woman who raised me, and the woman who raised me had laughed too, briefly, in the way you laugh at a joke that is accurate enough to be funny, and that you immediately know you shouldn't have laughed at. I sat with these things in the Kedzie Avenue apartment, at the folding table in the quiet after 9 p.m., and I did something I had never done before. I let them be what they were. Not complicated, not the result of difficult circumstances or financial stress or the particular pressures of a family trying to hold itself together. Not excusable, not understandable, not something I needed to find a generous interpretation for. What they were was simple. They had loved what I provided. They had never not really loved me. The understanding arrived without drama. No breakdown, no rage, no moment of cinematic clarity. It was more like the moment your eyes adjust to a dark room and you see the furniture that was always there. The room hasn't changed. You've just stopped pretending you can't see. I cried once on a Tuesday night doing dishes. Not for long. Not with any particular direction to it, just a few minutes of something releasing that had been held for a long time. Then I dried my hands and went back to the folding table and kept working. I did not call my family. They did not call me. James Whitfield had been 2 years ahead of me at Meridian. We'd worked adjacent desks for 3 years in the mid-2000s. Not close friends exactly. More the particular kind of work relationship that accumulates enough shared experience to survive after the shared experience ends. He'd left Meridian 4 years before my layoff to do something he described as fintech stuff, which in my experience meant either something serious or something that was serious about appearing serious. And I'd filed him under follow-up someday and then not followed up. He called on a Thursday in March. Not a text, a call, which was unusual enough in itself to make me answer it without screening. I heard about Meridian, he said. You doing okay? Working through it. What kind of working through it? Temp work data analysis. A pause, are you serious? It pays the bills. Daniel? He said it with the exasperated fondness of someone who has just been told something unnecessary. You're the best financial systems analyst I worked with for 10 years, and you're doing temp data entry. The market is fine for someone with your background. Another pause. Look, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come in? Not a formal thing, just come see what we're building. The office was in the West Loop, a floor of a building on Randolph that had the particular organized energy of a company moving faster than its infrastructure. Whiteboards everywhere. People in the kind of focused motion that suggested they knew what they were doing, and were in the early stages of finding out how much of it was right. James walked me through it over 2 hours. A fintech platform targeting the gap between traditional banking and the underserved small business market. Specifically, the friction in cash flow management and short-term financing that cost small operators time and money they couldn't recover. He'd been building it for 14 months. He had a product, early traction, a team of 7, and a funding conversation with a Series A investor that was moving from theoretical to practical. I need a CFO, he said. Someone who can build the financial architecture from the ground up. Someone who understands both the institutional side and the operational side, and can talk to investors without making them nervous. I looked at the whiteboard behind him, which had a diagram of the platform's revenue model covered in annotations. What's the equity offer? I said. He told me. I looked at the diagram for a moment longer. Okay, I said. The next 18 months were the most focused of my life. I moved from the Kedzie Avenue apartment to a studio in the West Loop that cost more, but was 6 blocks from the office, and let me be there early and late in a way that the commute had made difficult. I worked in the way I had always been capable of working, but had spent 12 years distributing across other people's priorities. Fully, with the complete application of everything I knew and everything I was learning. I was good at it. I had always been good at it. I just never pointed it at myself before. The Series A closed in November. $4.2 million, led by a Chicago-based fund that had been watching the small business fintech space and liked what we'd built. I was in the room for the final meeting. I'd built the financial model the investors had been scrutinizing for 8 weeks. When the term sheet arrived, James and I sat in the conference room after everyone else had left and looked at it for a while without saying anything. "We should get dinner," he said finally. "Yeah," I said, "we should." We got dinner. We talked about the next phase, the hiring, the product expansion, the Series B timeline. We talked about what the company could become. At some point during the conversation, I noticed that I was genuinely happy, in the specific, unperformed way of someone who has found the place where their capabilities meet a problem worth solving. I hadn't felt that in a long time. I hadn't felt it possibly ever. My mother called on a Thursday in October, 16 months after I'd stood on the porch with the key that didn't work. I knew when I saw her name on the screen that something had happened. She didn't call to check in. That had never been the pattern. She called when there was a situation. I let it ring. She called again an hour later. Then again that evening. The third time, she left a voicemail, something she almost never did. I listened to it that night sitting in my West Loop apartment with the city lights visible through the window. Her voice on the message was different from the voice I'd been hearing my whole life. Not performing, not calibrated, just tired, and underneath the tired, something closer to frightened. "Daniel, it's Mom. I need you to call me back when you can. There's a situation with your father, some legal things. It's gotten complicated. Please call me." I put the phone face down on the table. I made tea. I stood at the window and looked at the lights. I thought about calling back. I held the thought for a while, examined it the way you examine something you're not sure you should touch. Felt the old instinct, the one that sent me to Naperville on a Tuesday, that transferred $18,000 at 11 p.m., that said yes before the question finished. Felt it there, present, recognizable. And felt something else underneath it. Something that had been growing in the Kedzie Avenue apartment at the folding table, in the 18 months of early mornings and late nights, in the Series A conference room and the dinner after, and every morning I'd woken up and gone to work on something that was mine. I put the phone away. I did not call back that night. I found out from James, actually, who mentioned it over coffee in that casual way people mention things they assume you know. The story had been in the Tribune's business section. Richard Carter, 60, of Naperville, facing civil litigation from multiple creditors. The amounts were substantial. One of the investment opportunities from several years back had apparently compounded over time in the direction such things tend to compound. Sophie and Marcus I learned about through the same route, a mutual acquaintance, someone who'd been at the wedding, who mentioned it offhandedly. The real estate market had not been kind to people who'd leveraged aggressively in Marcus's particular way. The Lincoln Park apartment was gone. Sophie had moved back to Naperville, apparently, or somewhere in that direction. I thought about Sophie in the Lincoln Park apartment with the flowers on the counter and the new couch and the print on the wall. I thought about the wedding at the Palmer house, table 11, the family table 12 feet away. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the particular absence of surprise that comes when a thing you've seen coming for a long time finally arrives. My mother called 4 more times over the following 2 weeks. My father called twice, the first time in 2 years, his name appearing on my screen with the specific quality of an object resurfacing from a depth you'd assumed permanent. Both times I watched the call ring through and sat with the feeling of not answering it and understood gradually that not answering was itself a decision. A conscious one, not avoidance. Choice. On a Wednesday morning, my mother left another voicemail, longer this time. "Daniel, I know things have been difficult between us. I understand that. But your father is in serious trouble and we're not in a position to handle this ourselves anymore. We need help. I need you to call me back, please." I listened to it twice. Then I called my mother back. She answered on the first ring. "Daniel," relief in the voice, immediate, unguarded. Thank you for calling." "What do you need?" I said. A pause. The pause of someone adjusting to a tone they hadn't expected. "We need help with the legal situation. A lawyer and—" "I can give you a name," I said. "A good attorney who handles civil litigation. I'll text you his contact information." Another pause. "We were hoping you could. The name is Marcus Webb. He's excellent. Tell him I referred you." A beat. "Is there anything else?" Silence. "Daniels, I have a meeting in 10 minutes, I said. "I'll send the contact. Take care of yourselves." I hung up. I sent the contact information. Then I went to my 10 o'clock meeting, which was with a product team working on a new feature. And I sat at the table and looked at the whiteboard and participated in the conversation. and the morning moved forward in the ordinary way of mornings. 2 weeks later, my mother called again. Then Sophie called, Sophie, who had not called in over a year, whose name on my screen had the quality of something from a different chapter. I didn't answer. They kept calling. On a Tuesday morning in November, my assistant knocked on my office door and said there were 3 people in reception asking to see me. She had the expression of someone who had found the situation slightly unusual and was delivering it neutrally. "Who are they?" I said. She looked at her notepad. "A Linda Carter, a Richard Carter, and a Sophie," she stopped. "Carter, same last name." I looked at her for a moment. "Put them in conference room B," I said. "Offer them coffee. Should I tell them when you'll be available?" I looked at the schedule on my screen, then out the window at the November Chicago morning. Gray and cold and very ordinary. "Tell them I'll be with them when I can," I said. She nodded and went out. I sat at my desk. I had a call at 10, a product review at 11, a lunch meeting with a potential Series B investor at 12:30. I made my 10 o'clock call. I went to the product review. I went to the lunch meeting, which ran long in the good way, the way that means the conversation is going somewhere. At 3:45 p.m., I walked down the hall toward conference room B. Through the glass wall, I could see them. My mother sitting with her coat still on, her handbag on the table in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, not dramatically. Just the particular reduction of someone who has been in a waiting room for a long time. She was looking at her phone with the expression of a woman who had been checking it periodically for hours. My father to her right, elbows on the table, hands loosely clasped. He was looking at the surface of the table. He'd aged since February of the previous year, or I was seeing it now in a way I hadn't allowed myself to see it before. The easy charm was still there in the architecture of his face, but something had gone out of it. The animation, maybe. The confidence that the room was always manageable. Sophie across from them. She was looking at the wall. Her expression was the expression I'd seen only a few times in her life, stripped of the performance, no audience to calibrate for. She looked tired in the specific way of someone who has discovered that certain kinds of tired don't go away with sleep. I stood outside the glass for a moment. 6 hours and 40 minutes. They had been sitting in that conference room for 6 hours and 40 minutes, in a building they didn't know I ran, waiting for a meeting with someone they believed was a contact or a connection or some institutional resource I might have access to. My assistant had offered coffee. She had told them I'd be available when I could. She had not told them who I was in relation to this company, and no one had asked, or no one had looked closely enough at the nameplate on the door at the end of the hall. I put my hand on the door handle. I thought about the porch, the key that didn't work, the drive to the 24-hour diner, and the folding table on Kedzie Avenue, and the $11 Goodwill chair, and 18 months of early mornings aimed at something that was mine. I thought about an ATM that also has feelings. I opened the door. They looked up when I walked in. My mother first, her eyes going from the door to my face with the particular speed of someone who has been waiting long enough that any movement registers immediately. Then my father, slower, lifting his head from the table's surface. Then Sophie, turning from the wall. 3 seconds of silence. My mother's face moved through several things quickly. Surprise, genuine, unperformed. Then something more complicated, a rapid recalculation happening behind her eyes. She looked at the room around her differently now, the way you look at a room when the context shifts. The glass walls, the company name on the door at the end of the hall, the assistant who had offered coffee without explaining anything. "Daniel," she said. I sat down across from them. I didn't take off my jacket. I set nothing on the table. I sat the way you sit when you're not planning to stay long. "You work here," my father said. His voice had the quality of a man arriving at a conclusion he should have reached earlier. "I'm the CFO," I said. "James Whitfield is the CEO. You may have read about the Series A." Sophie was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not the condescension, not the breezy dismissiveness. Something that might have been, underneath everything, embarrassment. The specific embarrassment of understanding all at once the full shape of a mistake. My mother said, "Why didn't you tell us?" "You didn't ask," I said. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands moved on the table. A small, contained movement. The gesture of someone suppressing a larger one. "We've been calling," she said. "I know. For weeks." "Yes." She looked at me. You didn't have to make us wait here all day, Daniel. We're your family." I let the sentence sit in the room for a moment. Outside the glass wall, the office moved in its ordinary way, someone crossing the hall, a distant conversation, the sound of the elevator arriving. What do you need? I said. My father leaned forward slightly. He still had the architecture of charm even now, even here, even in this configuration, the slight lean, the direct eye contact, the voice pitched to suggest reasonableness. The litigation, the creditors. We're at a point where we need. It's beyond what we can manage. How much? He told me. The number was large. Not catastrophic by the standards of what I was working with now, but large in the way that had always defined our conversations. Large enough to solve an immediate problem, not large enough to solve the underlying one, which was that the underlying problem was not financial. I looked at the number for a moment. No, I said. My father blinked. I'm not going to cover the litigation costs, I said. Or the debt, or whatever comes after the debt. My mother's voice went to the register it went to when she was moving from practical to emotional, not dramatically, just a shift, like a key change. Daniel, your father could lose everything. I know. We could lose the house. I know. How can you sit there and... She stopped. Reset. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, the particular softness that had always been the most effective instrument she had. We're your family. We raised you. Everything we did it for the family. Whatever happened between us, that doesn't just. What happened between us? I said. She stopped. I looked at her, at my father, at Sophie, who had not spoken and was looking at the table. I want to ask you something, I said, and I need you to answer it honestly. My mother nodded. My 32nd birthday, I said. Do you remember it? A pause, her eyes moved slightly, the movement of someone searching. Of course. What did we do? Silence. Mom, what did we do for my 32nd birthday? The silence stretched. My father looked at the table. My mother's hands moved again on its surface. There was a lot going on that year, she said finally. The Sophie situation and your father's. You forgot, I said. You all forgot. I called to remind you 2 days before. You said you'd do something that weekend. The weekend came and went and no one called. Daniels, my 33rd birthday, you called in the morning. You said happy birthday and then asked if I could move up the mortgage payment because a check had bounced. I kept my voice level. Not cold exactly, just clear, the way you speak when you need something heard without interference. My 34th, Sophie texted, 2 words, you didn't call at all. My mother was looking at me with the eyes that had always, in the past, been enough to redirect me. The eyes that carried enough genuine pain to make my legitimate pain feel like cruelty in comparison. I know we weren't, she stopped. We weren't always. I know there were times we could have done better, I know that. But everything I did, everything your father and I... Her voice broke slightly, the careful break of a woman who knows how to use it. We did the best we could. We're not perfect, but we love you. That's never. Do you know what Sophie called me? I said. Sophie's head came up. At her wedding? I didn't look away from my mother. In the coach room at the Palmer house, she called me an ATM that also has feelings, and you laughed. My mother's face went still. It was brief, I said. You suppressed it quickly, but you laughed. The room was very quiet. I've been thinking about that for 2 years, I said. Not because it was cruel, I've had worse, but because of what it told me. It told me that on some level, in some private, unguarded moment, that's what you actually thought. Not your son. Not someone who'd given 12 years and a savings account and the better part of himself. A machine. A convenient machine that had developed the inconvenient characteristic of having feelings about the transaction. Sophie said, that's not, she stopped. What? I said. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, not performing, I thought. Actually wet. That's not all you were to me. That's not, she stopped again. And whatever she was going to say seemed to fail her, seemed to not be available in the form she needed. And she looked back at the table. I know you don't think that's all I was, I said. That's what makes it complicated. You don't think of me as only a financial resource. You think of me as a brother who is also a financial resource. The love is real. I believe that. I paused. It was just never enough to change the behavior. No one said anything. My father was looking at his hands. The charm architecture was still there, the structure of it, but empty now, the way a building looks when the people have left. He looked his age. He looked like a man who had made 1,000 small decisions that added up to a life. He was now sitting inside of without exits. I forged your signature, he said. He said it to the table, quietly, without preamble. Yes, I said. He stopped. I told myself it didn't matter because you were going to pay it anyway, that it was just paperwork. He was still looking at his hands. I've thought about that. I want you to know I've thought about it. Okay, I said. I'm sorry, he said. I sat with the apology for a moment, felt it arrive, felt what it did and didn't do. I believe you, I said. He looked up. "I believe you're sorry," I said. I believed Mom when she said she was sorry after the locks. I believe Sophie has complicated feelings about all of this that she doesn't entirely know how to navigate. I believe the love is real in the versions each of you is capable of. I looked at my mother, then my father, then Sophie. I just don't think it matters anymore. For me, what I mean is, I paused, finding the right formulation, the one that was accurate rather than dramatic. I spent 35 years trying to make you see me as something other than what I could provide. I'm not going to spend the next 35 doing the same thing. My mother said, "So that's it, you're just..." "I'm going to refer you to a firm that handles debt restructuring," I said. "I'll make a call this afternoon. They're good and they'll work with your situation. That's what I can do." I stood up. I'm not going to cover the debt. I'm not going to be the solution to the next thing after the debt. I'm not going to be available in the way I've been available. "Daniel," my mother's voice. The soft version, the real version, the one underneath the performance that I had spent my whole life responding to. "You're my son." I looked at her. "I know," I said. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. "The firm is called Addison Partners. I'll have my assistant send the contact." I moved toward the door. "Take care of yourselves." Sophie said my name. Just my name, nothing after it, the word alone in the room, and something in the way she said it made me stop with my hand on the door. I turned and looked at her. She was looking at me with the expression of someone who has run out of the version of themselves they usually present and is left with whatever is underneath. She looked young, suddenly. Not in a good way, in the way of someone who has been insulated from certain kinds of growing up and is encountering them all at once. "I'm sorry," she said, "about what I said, about all of it, the way I talked about you." A pause. "You deserved better than that." I looked at my sister. I thought about the flowers on her counter, and the print on the wall, and the coffee we'd had at her kitchen table before everything got worse. I thought about when she was 9 years old and I was 16, and she used to bring me drawings she'd made and explain them with a seriousness that I'd found, even then, genuinely charming. I thought about the fact that whatever she'd become in the years between, she was still, somewhere inside it, the person who had done that. "I know," I said. I opened the door. I walked down the hall past the assistant's desk, past the whiteboards and the people in motion and the window that looked out over Randolph Street at the November afternoon. I walked to my office. I sat at my desk. I made the call to Addison Partners, explained the situation briefly, gave them the names, asked them to reach out. Then I sat at my desk for a while and looked at the city out the window. The gray November sky, the traffic on Randolph, the ordinary Chicago afternoon proceeding in its ordinary way. I didn't feel what I'd expected to feel. I'd assumed in some part of me that the confrontation would feel larger, more conclusive, like a door slamming. It felt like a door closing, quietly, with the gentle click of something that had been ajar for a long time finally resting in its frame. I went back to work. 3 months later, I turned 36. James found out about my birthday the way James found out about most things, through the kind of lateral awareness of someone who pays attention to people, who notices the small facts that others file and forget. He asked me once casually when it was. I told him. He said nothing more about it. On the morning of March 14th, I came into the office at 7:15 to find that someone had put a card on my desk. Then another. Then, by 8:30, there were 6 of them from the product team, from the analysts, from the 2 people on the financial operations side who I'd hired myself and who had become, without my noticing, something like friends. James appeared in my doorway at 9, with coffee from the place on the corner that I liked. "Happy birthday," he said. "You didn't have to." "I know," he set the coffee on my desk. "There's dinner tonight, the whole team, that Thai place on Fulton, reservations at 7. He said it the way he said most things, factually, without performance, as if it were simply the obvious next step. "James, 7 o'clock, he said. "Don't be weird about it." He went back to his desk. I sat with the coffee and the 6 cards and the ordinary morning light coming through the window, and I felt something that I didn't immediately try to name. Just let it be there, whatever it was. Something warm in the chest. Something that didn't ask anything from me in return. The dinner was loud and easy and ran past 10. 8 people around a table that was slightly too small, good food and bad jokes, and the particular kind of conversation that happens between people who have spent a year building something hard together. I sat in the middle of it and drank my beer and listened and talked and laughed at the right moments and some wrong ones. Nobody asked me for anything. That was the thing I noticed, sitting there. The absence of it. The way the evening moved without anyone needing me to solve something or cover something or be the mechanism by which another person's problem got resolved. Just company. Just people who were there because they wanted to be there with no transaction underneath. I walked home after. The night was cold the way March nights in Chicago are cold. The winter not quite finished, the spring not quite started, the air with a quality of held breath. I walked the 6 blocks from the restaurant to my apartment with my hands in my coat pockets and my breath visible in the streetlight. My phone was quiet, no calls from Naperville, no calls from Lincoln Park or wherever Sophie was living now. My father had gone through the Addison Partners process. I knew this secondhand, through the attorney, and the litigation was being managed slowly in the grinding way these things get managed. The house in Naperville had been sold. My mother was in a smaller place. Sophie and Marcus were, from what I understood, working through things in the particular private way of 2 people deciding whether they still made sense together. I had not called any of them. I was not going to call any of them tonight. I stopped at the corner of Randolph and Aberdeen and looked up. The sky over the city was the particular city night color, not black, not dark blue, something in between, backlit by the accumulated light of 3 million people going about their lives. The wind came off the lake and moved through the street, and I stood in it for a moment, hands in my pockets, 36 years old, not going anywhere immediately. I thought about the folding table on Kedzie Avenue, about the car in the diner parking lot with the snow on the windows, about a key turning in a lock that had been changed. I thought about being 9 years old, watching my father charm a room, thinking, I want to be the person everyone counts on. I had been that person. For 12 years, I had been exactly that person. I didn't want it anymore. Not because the wanting had turned to bitterness. It hadn't, not exactly, not in the corrosive way. More because I had found, in the last 18 months, what it felt like to want something for myself and work toward it and have it become real. And that feeling, the feeling of something built from the inside out, answering only to what you actually believed and valued and chose, was so different from the feeling of being, needed that they barely seemed like the same category of experience. Being needed had felt like purpose. This felt like life. I turned and walked the last block home. Upstairs in the apartment, I made tea and sat at the window. A real desk now, not a folding table, in an apartment that was mine in the full sense. I looked at the street below, at the late-night city doing its late-night things. On the desk beside my laptop was the card James had put there in the morning. I hadn't opened it in the office, had meant to, kept getting pulled into things. I opened it now. He'd written one line, in the practical handwriting of someone who knows what they want to say and doesn't need to dress it up. Good to have you here, Carter. Happy birthday. I set the card back on the desk. Outside, a cab moved through the intersection. Someone's window across the street threw a rectangle of warm light onto the pavement. The city breathed in the way it breathes at midnight. Not quiet, never quiet, just lower, steadier, its own kind of rest. I sat there for a while, not doing anything in particular. It was enough.
I've been broken, burned to dust, faded dreams in ashes rust. But from the fire